Abandoned with a crumbling mansion and their cruel laughter, she uncovered a shocking secret within its walls. Years later, their fortune gone, they returned, only to find the woman they scorned. After their parents' passing, Liam and Chloe, with cruel smirks, handed their adopted sister, Elena, a set of rusted keys to a forgotten, crumbling estate. What Elena discovered within its decaying walls would utterly transform everything. When the last will and testament were finally read aloud, the vast family fortune, every last cent, was divided solely between Liam and Chloe. Elena, she received absolutely nothing but the dilapidated Sterling family mansion, a place so neglected they hadn't bothered to step foot in it for years. Oh, how their laughter echoed in that sterile lawyer's office, a chilling sound that still rang in Elena's ears as she clutched those cold, heavy keys and walked away. But little did they know, hidden behind the rotting woodwork and dust-choked corridors, Elena would unearth something her selfish siblings never even dreamed existed. Something infinitely more valuable than all the wealth they had so greedily claimed. Years later, when their own lavish fortunes evaporated, and desperation drove them, humbled and broken, to the very gates of Elena's now majestically restored mansion, the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. Elena, the once dismissed outsider, now held the very terms of their survival in her hands. Can you imagine the irony? The frigid air inside Sterling & Associates Law was sharper than the biting February wind outside. A cold that seeped right into your bones, not from the temperature but from the disdainful gazes of those gathered. Elena Sterling sat perfectly still in a high-backed leather chair at the far end of the gleaming mahogany table. She didn't dare lean back, didn't cross her legs. Her hands remained clasped neatly in her lap, a quiet echo of the little girl who was always told to just sit still and be grateful. Across from her, Liam and Chloe, her adoptive siblings, whispered conspiratorially, not about their parents, not about their grief, but about stock portfolios and which pieces of art from the New York penthouse would look best in their own upscale apartments. Their voices were sharp, rehearsed, already carving up the life their parents had left behind. A few family friends, an aunt, the old financial advisor, they all sat on the periphery, murmuring judgmentally. "She's just here for the charity cut," one voice floated, just loud enough to sting. "Always was the outsider," another added, confirming her deepest fears. Elena kept her eyes fixed on the polished wood, breathing slowly, steadily. If she looked up, they'd see the hurt, and she had learned long ago that in this family, showing hurt was surrendering power. The lawyer cleared his throat, the rustle of papers a jarring sound. As per the wishes of the late Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, his voice droned, flat and devoid of warmth. Liam receives the penthouse in Manhattan, Chloe the sprawling vineyard in Sonoma Valley. The remaining liquid assets, cash, bonds, stocks, are to be split evenly between the two. Then came the agonizing pause, the kind that made every eye in the room flick towards Elena, and to Elena Sterling, the family estate in upstate New York. The estate, what a generous term for it. Elena knew the place all too well. A sprawling mansion her parents had abandoned years ago, its upkeep far exceeding its charm. A roof sagged under decades of neglect, windows shattered by forgotten storms, gardens devoured by rampant weed. The last time she'd seen it, the grand double doors were sealed shut with a rusted chain, like a tomb. Liam's lips twisted into a cruel smirk. "Guess you won't be homeless, huh?" he muttered, just loud enough for a ripple of hushed laughter to spread through the room. Chloe didn't even try to hide her amusement. "Maybe you could open it as a haunted house? You know, make it useful." A few bystanders exchanged knowing glances. "They're just giving her something to keep her busy," a woman whispered from the back. "Better than nothing, I suppose," another replied, completely oblivious to the depth of Elena's quiet resolve. Elena sat perfectly still, allowing the initial sting to pass through her, refusing to let it anchor in her heart. She simply reached out when the lawyer slid the old, heavy iron keys towards her. They were cold, substantial, the kind of keys that belonged to a place untouched for generations. No eloquent speech, no forced thanks. She simply slipped them into her bag and rose. As she walked towards the door, the murmurs behind her swelled again, but not a single person called out to her. Outside, the harsh winter air bit at her cheek. The city hummed on, oblivious, as if nothing monumental had just transpired. She pulled her coat tighter, her resolve hardening, and headed straight for the train station. She didn't return to her rented apartment in Brooklyn. Instead, she bought a one-way ticket north, leaving the cities and suburbs behind, leaving the places where the sterling name still held influence. By the time the train finally slowed into the tiny upstate New York station, snow had begun to fall. Not the delicate, fluttering kind, but the wet, heavy flakes that soaked into her gloves and made the roads treacherous. A rusted pickup truck she'd hired idled outside, its driver leaning against the hood, watching her with that polite, reserved curiosity small towns reserve for strangers. The drive to the estate was long and winding, the trees closing in tighter and tighter the further they went. The paved road dissolved into gravel, then dirt, and then, just as the sky darkened into late afternoon, the mansion loomed into view. It stood like a silent sentinel at the end of the overgrown driveway, its once white facade streaked black from years of relentless storms. The tall front windows were nothing more than gaping, empty holes, some crudely boarded, others open to the freezing air. The gardens, once the proud masterpiece of the sterling matriarch, were now a horrifying tangle of thorny branches and dead, decaying leaves. The driver let out a low whistle. "Been a while since anyone cared for this place," he murmured. Elena didn't respond. She simply stepped out into the biting cold, her boots crunching over ice and gravel, and stood there for a long moment. In the profound silence, she could almost hear the phantom echoes of her siblings' mocking laughter. She tightened her scarf, climbed the cracked stone steps, and slid the ancient key into the lock. It turned with a tortured groan. The grand front doors eased inward inch by agonizing inch, like lungs slowly remembering how to breathe. Dust hung thick in the entryway, a slow-moving, silent ocean, under a single shaft of pale winter light. Elena didn't step fully inside at first. She stood on the threshold, her fingers curled tightly around the key as if it were a sacred talisman, allowing her eyes to adjust to the oppressive gloom. The foyer, once grand with its twin curling staircases and a chandelier the size of a small car, had been ravaged by time. The massive chandelier sagged precariously from a single chain, its crystals caked with years of grime. A relentless draft snaked through the boarded-up windows, winding around her ankles like an unseen cat. Somewhere deeper within the house, a shutter tap, 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 patient and maddeningly repetitive. She took one hesitant step, then another. Her boots whispered over the grit that coated the floors. With each movement, tiny eddies of dust rose and settled, quiet as a held breath. She ran her palm along the banister. It was sticky, splintered, then wiped her hand on her coat with a grim, defiant smile. "Welcome home, huh?" she whispered to herself. She made a slow circuit of the ground floor. The dining room was a solemn cathedral of cobwebs. The conservatory's glass roof had long ago caved in, allowing vines to trespass, then die, leaving behind a haunting lacework of brown stems. In the kitchen, a forgotten pot still sat on a cold stove, its fossilized grease catching the dim light like ancient amber. She cracked a window, coughed, then opened it wider. Fresh air reluctantly began to creep in. She chose a small room behind the kitchen as her base, 4 sturdy walls, one window that, miraculously, mostly closed. She unrolled a thin mattress, shook out a blanket, and set her bag down with the quiet finality of planting a flag. The small heater she'd brought groaned to life, casting a thin, meager halo of warmth that bravely fought the overwhelming cold of the room. Still, she held her hands near it, turning them, toasting one side then the other. Little rituals, small, hard-won victories. The work came in painstaking increments. First a broom, then a bucket, a foldable lamp, clipped to a doorframe, its beam knifing through the suffocating murk. She swept until her shoulders screamed in protest, then swept some more. Her movements became a steady, rhythmic metronome. Push, gather, lift. When the bucket was full, she carried it out to the back steps, her shoulders squared against the biting wind, and tipped the gray, grimy water onto the frozen earth. Steam rose in lazy ribbons, then faded like a fleeting thought. She chose not to think. 2 days later, she walked into the village hardware store. The bell over the door chimed a cheerful sound that felt at odds with the way conversations abruptly paused, then resumed subtly, not cruelly, just curiosity wearing a sweater. She meticulously selected tarps, a respirator, sturdy gloves, a pry bar, a headlamp. She moved down the aisles with the focused economy of someone mentally tallying every single penny. At the register, the clerk glanced up, then down, then up again. "You the one up at the old Sterling place?" he asked. "Yeah," she replied easily. "Roof's a mess." He slid the items across the scanner. "Basement floods when the thaw hits." "Just saying." "Appreciate it," she said, stacking her supplies with neat, precise hands. "I'll take a wet vac, too." By the paint section, two women compared swatches, their whispers floating on the cold air. "Is she staying there alone?" "Looks like it. That place chews people up." On the sidewalk outside, a pair of teens in puffy jackets shuffled past. "Yo, that's the city lady," one said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Why bother fixing a haunted museum?" The other answered, softer, almost sympathetic. "Still kind of brave." Elena kept walking, no anger in her chest, just a steady, practical hum of determination. Do this, then that, then rest. Back at the mansion, she bravely tackled the library. Even in its ruined state, it possessed an undeniable presence. With its floor-to-ceiling shelves, a rolling ladder frozen mid-climb, and leather book spines cracked like ancient knuckles. She opened the tall casement windows an inch, letting the raw cold bite the room clean, revealing the faint scent of old paper, varnish, and a ghost of pipe smoke that had seeped into the wood. Stubbornly refusing to leave, she sorted in silence. Keep, donate, trash. The keep pile grew slowest, as selective as a beating heart. When she lifted heavier volumes, her breath would roughen, fogging the beam of her headlamp. She'd switch hands, flex her fingers, rotate her wrists, micro movements, small resets, the meticulous craft of staying with hard things. Evenings were reserved for repairs that didn't require ladders. She scraped paint in her small room until curls of it fell like snow. She patched holes with compound, sanded, then ran her palm over the wall, nodding not with pleasure, but with a quiet sense of accomplishment. Dinner was simple: soup warmed on a camp stove, bread and an apple. She ate sitting on a crate, slowly, mindfully, listening to the house make its old, animal noises. Tap, settle. On the third morning, the plumber arrived, his boots thumping a steady rhythm down the hall. He surveyed the basement with the expression of a man confronting a particularly difficult crossword puzzle. "These pipes," he murmured, kneeling. "They're a history lesson." He talked shop, and she listened intently, asking for parts lists, dates, costs. When he finally left, she stood alone at the top of the basement steps, staring down into the impenetrable darkness. A chilling cold seemed to climb from below, like a creeping thought. She exhaled a long, steady breath, then turned away. Not today, she decided. Midweek, a bitter wind front swept through, and the mansion creaked and tightened, complaining in low, mournful tone. She wrapped her scarf tighter and ventured into the upstairs hallway, checking for leaks, laying towels under suspect sills, and quietly naming the rooms, claiming them as her own. East bedroom, corner suite, nursery with the faded blue border. Naming them organized the monumental scale of the task. Naming them made it hers. She returned to the library in the late afternoon, that magical hour when the light thins and all edges soften. She pulled the rolling ladder, its wheels churning softly, and climbed to the third shelf. Her gloved fingers sought out a thick, ancient atlas. It resisted, then yielded with a papery sigh. Behind it, the backboard of the shelf looked just slightly off, not crooked but shifted, as if the wood had separated from the wall by barely the width of a fingernail. She frowned, settled the atlas on her thigh, and tapped the panel, knuckle against wood. Once, twice. The sound wasn't the dull thud she expected. It had a faint, hollow core, like tapping a drum whose skin had been pulled too tight. She leaned closer. The wood grain at the edge didn't quite match the adjacent planks. A seam, hair-thin, ran vertically. Not a revelation, not a sudden rush of adrenaline, just a soft, persistent tilt in her attention. She climbed down slowly, her knees careful on each rung. On the floor, she placed the atlas with her growing keep pile, then crouched by the ladder's wheels and rolled it flush against the shelf to anchor her reach. She removed one glove, pressed her fingertips to the seam, and traced it from waist height to shoulder. Her skin registered subtle temperature changes, the way a tongue senses a chipped tooth. Here, warmer, there the air cool. She split her fingers and pushed gently. Nothing. She tried the lower edge, thumb to the baseboard. Nothing. She tried the upper right corner. A careful, inward pressure. A whisper of movement so slight, she felt it more than saw it. She paused, her hand still, scanning the surrounding wood for a catch. A peg, a hidden hinge. Old houses, she knew, taught you to listen in more than one direction. Through your ears, through your skin, through infinite patience. She stood, rolled her shoulders, and took a deep breath that filled the very bottom of her lungs. Not now, she decided. Not hungry, not tired, not rushed. She marked the seam with a tiny pencil dot, then stepped back to sweep for another hour, choosing to let the question, the possibility, breathe. By twilight, the snow began again, soft and dry this time, the kind that hissed gently against the window screens. She laid her tools in a tidy line on a towel. Gloves, scraper, flashlight, a small flathead screwdriver she might use as a probe. She clicked off the clamp light, and the library plunged into a deeper dusk, the shelves becoming dark silhouettes stacked with mysterious shapes. She walked the perimeter once more slowly. In the far corner, a distinct draft slid out from behind a bookcase, like a whispered secret. She held her hand there, palm open, feeling the faintest ribbon of colder air thread past her skin. Her mouth quirked, almost a smile. "Okay," she murmured. The next morning, she returned to the hardware store for a stud finder and a proper pry tool. The bell chimed. Same clerk, same brief, curious pause. "You're really making a project of it," he commented, bagging the tools piece by piece. She tucked a stray braid behind her ear, the gesture small and precise. "What's the chance the walls hide surprises?" He shrugged, friendly but non-committal. "Old places keep stories. Sometimes they keep squirrels." Outside, the women from yesterday were back. Coffee steaming, gossip floating on their breath in the cold air. "She looks tired," one said. "She looks focused," the other replied, as if the two were not contradictions. Back at the mansion, she ate standing up, a quick sandwich and a handful of almonds, then meticulously drew a small sketch of the shelf on a notepad. Measurements, the seam's exact location, notes about the hollow sound. She wasn't chasing adrenaline. She was building a map. She set the stud finder against the panel. The device hummed softly, its light skipping in a pattern that utterly defied the predictable readings. She slid it horizontally, vertically, then diagonally, tilting her head the way you do when a familiar song plays a half step off. She jotted down the odd readings, then slid the flathead screwdriver into the tiniest gap at the base and applied the slightest feather-like pressure, just enough to test its flex. She stopped, pulled back. Not today, she told herself again. But the words felt different now. Not avoidance, but perfect timing. She reshelved the atlas, moved a row of novels to distribute the weight, and felt the shelf accept the load with a small, satisfied, settling sound. Evening found her outside, her breath puffing in the cold as she salted the stone steps. The sky had cleared to a hard blue-black canvas, stars sharp enough to prick a finger. She leaned on the rail, gazing out over the grounds, and pictured precise lines, paths she'd clear, flower beds she'd replant, lights she'd string along the long drive. This wasn't fantasy, this was a plan, stretched over months like canvas, over a frame. From the distant road, faint voices drifted, two walkers, a dog's collar clinking, the small town slowly waking up to her presence. "About time," one said. "Took somebody stubborn," the other answered. Elena pushed off the rail, rolled her shoulders, and went back inside, closing the door with a firmness that resonated like a promise. Inside, the house seemed to exhale. She set her alarm for early. Tomorrow would be a library day, not for a grand dramatic reveal. No, for careful work, steady hands, and the quiet, deliberate discovery of what the wood was finally willing to say when asked the right way. The next morning broke in layers of ethereal silver fog, the kind that blurred the line between sky and ground. Elena woke before her alarm, not startled, but with a steady inner knowing, as if the day itself had been patiently waiting for her. She dressed in her warmest layers, pulling on fingerless gloves, so her hands could feel textures without freezing, and walked directly to the library. The air in there now had a faint, invigorating crispness, the culmination of days of cracked windows and constant sweeping. She set the lamp at a low angle, ensuring that shadows revealed more than light, then pulled the rolling ladder to the precise seam she'd marked with her pencil. Her tools lay lined up on a drop cloth, each one within a hand's easy reach. She began with the flathead, slipping it into the gap at the base. Gentle like testing the teeth of a key in an unfamiliar lock. A whisper of wood fibers gave way. She moved the tool higher, pressing where the stud finder had hinted at empty space. This time the panel shifted with a soft sigh, barely an inch, but it was enough. She paused, breath in, breath out, no rush, no sudden, forceful pull. She pressed her palm against the panel and eased it sideways. It moved with the stubborn, yielding resistance of something untouched for decades, until its edge finally revealed absolute darkness. A hollow space stretched behind the wall, tall enough for her to step into. The smell hit her first. Not rot, but a dry metallic scent like ancient coins kept too long in a drawer. She switched on her headlamp and ducked inside. Her boots met cold, smooth stone. The narrow corridor terminated at a formidable steel door, the kind with a dial combination lock that belonged in an old bank vault. The handle was tarnished, but perfectly intact, its surprising weight pulling her hand downward when she touched it. She let go, the metal's chill lingering on her fingertips. Elena didn't have the combination, but she possessed an endless well of patience. She meticulously snapped photos of the lock, the hinges, the weld lines. Then she called a locksmith. Not the kind you'd find in a phone book, but the kind who answers with a suspicious, "Who gave you my number?" He arrived the next afternoon in a dented, unmarked van, his tools discreetly hidden under a blanket. He asked no questions, simply studied the vault with the profound appreciation of a true craftsman. "This," he declared, "is older than both of us combined." It took him 4 grueling hours, with only brief breaks to warm his hands and silently sip coffee. Elena sat cross-legged near the library door, watching dust motes dance in the beam of her lamp, listening to the faint, precise clicks and the locksmith's occasional hums of approval. When the final tumblers fell into place, there was no dramatic swing, no echoing clang, just a low, protesting creak as the heavy door inched open. Cold, musty air spilled out, followed by the faint scent of aged paper and something sharper, perhaps polish, or the ghost of cedar. Inside, metal shelves lined the walls, each stacked with neatly wrapped shapes in canvas or sealed in wax paper. She reached for the nearest bundle, unwrapped it, and found thick stacks of crisp, surprisingly well-preserved cash despite its age. Another shelf held gleaming gold bars, stamped with dates from the late 1970s, each one heavy enough to make her wrist ache when she lifted it. Burr bonds lay in neat rows, their printed faces declaring values that made her eyes blur with disbelief. A wooden crate in the corner held a dazzling collection of uncut gemstones, rubies, sapphires, emeralds, their colors flashing under the lamplight, each one cool and solid against her skin. She worked in silence, her mind not leaping ahead to staggering totals or sensational headlines. This wasn't a mere jackpot moment. It was a profound shift in gravity. Every step she took in that vault felt heavier, more deliberate. She was no longer the same woman who had stood in that lawyer's office mere weeks ago, holding those worthless keys while her siblings' cruel laughter echoed in the room. Over the next several days, she meticulously inventoried everything. Each night, she locked the vault and hid the key in a secret place only she knew. She spent her evenings quietly at her makeshift desk, running numbers, researching investments, learning how to move such immense wealth without drawing unwanted attention. As repairs on the mansion accelerated, the small-town gossip shifted. At the hardware store, the clerk raised an eyebrow at her increasingly large orders. "She's going big," he told another customer. "And she's not wasting time, that's for sure," the man replied, impressed. By summer, scaffolding enveloped the mansion's facade. Fresh paint erased decades of weather-worn neglect, and the gardens once choked by weeds began to breathe again, rows of vibrant flowers reintroducing sunlight to the grounds. Gravel paths were meticulously restored into clean, inviting lines. Workers came and went, speaking of her in hushed, respectful tones. "Quiet boss but pays on time. She knows what she wants." No cutting corners. Inside, the library became a showpiece, restored to the deep, warm amber glow of its prime. The vault remained hidden behind the bookcase, its door locked, its contents untouched, save for what she needed to fund the next stage of her grand vision. She shouldn't sell the estate. She didn't flee to the city with her incredible windfall. She stayed, brick by painstaking brick, until the mansion stood as it once had, tall, graceful, and utterly impossible to ignore at the end of its long, sweeping drive. That's when her siblings finally called. The first desperate message came from Chloe, her voice thin, urgent. "Elena, we need to talk. It's important." The second from Liam, less polite, more demanding. "Call me. It's serious." They didn't know it yet, but the woman they were calling was no longer the one they had so arrogantly dismissed. She held the key now, not just to a hidden vault, but to the very table they'd once refused to let her sit at. The first time she saw them again wasn't some grand, pre-planned reunion. It was a raw November afternoon, the kind where the sky couldn't decide if it wanted to weep rain or snow. Elena had just stepped out of her study when she heard the distinct crunch of tires on the gravel drive. A slow, deliberate approach, certainly not a delivery van. She moved to the front window, parting the heavy curtain just enough to see a sleek black sedan idling under the bare oak trees. Liam stepped out first, his once tailored overcoat now hanging loose on his noticeably thinner frame. Chloe followed, dressed in muted beige, an outfit that tried desperately to whisper tasteful but couldn't hide the telltale fraying at the cuff. They stood there for a moment as if the very house itself made them nervous. When Elena opened the door, the wind sliced through the gap, carrying the faint, melancholic scent of wet leaves. "Elena," Chloe's voice was softer than she remembered, not weak, but almost warm, tinged with a desperate plea. "Can we come in?" Elena stepped aside without a word. Her siblings entered the foyer, their eyes darting wide with shock over the gleaming wood floors, the polished banisters, the magnificent chandelier, now restored to its full, glittering weight. This was not the ruin they had so callously handed her. They sat at the dining table, its oak surface polished to a mirror finish, their hands clasped tightly in their laps. No jokes now, no smirks. Liam cleared his throat, his voice barely a whisper. Things haven't been good. The vineyard's gone. The penthouse sold. We have debts. Real ones," Chloe added, her voice cracking. "We didn't know where else to go." Her eyes flickered up to Elena's, then back to her own clasped hands. From the kitchen, the faint, comforting hum of the kettle filled the heavy silence. Elena poured tea into 3 cups, calmly sliding theirs across the table before taking her own seat. She didn't rush to fill the space with false comfort. Let the silence work. Let them feel what it was to wait, to be utterly helpless. Finally, she spoke, her tone calm, unwavering. "When you gave me this house, you believed it was worthless." Neither of them dared to look up. "I transformed it into something more than you could ever imagine. And I did it without taking a single thing from either of you." She let that truth settle, its weight pressing down on them. "Now you're here because you need me." Chloe's voice broke just a little. "We'll do whatever it takes." Elena sipped her tea, watching them over the rim of the cup, a quiet power radiating from her. You'll repay every single cent. You'll work not just for me, but for something that truly matters. The foundation I established in our parents' name is expanding. You'll help run it, and you'll answer to me." Liam bristled faintly, his old pride twitching, but he remained silent. "It's not punishment," Elena continued, her voice steady. "It's perspective. The very same kind I had to earn when you left me with absolutely nothing." From the corner of the room, the winter light shifted, painting long, stark shadows across the table. Chloe nodded first, slow and deliberate. Liam followed, his shoulders slumping, as if finally setting down a burden he'd carried for far too long. When they finally left, the sedan's engine fading down the long drive, Elena stood at the library door. Her gaze traced the shelves, then the hidden vault beyond, the very heartbeat of everything that had made this extraordinary moment possible. Word of their return spread through the village within a week. At the bakery, 2 locals leaned over the counter, exchanging knowing glances. "They're working for her now. Sure looks that way. Life's funny like that, isn't it?" By spring, the 3 of them could be seen together at various charity events, ribbon cuttings and fundraisers. But everyone knew whose name was on the checks, whose vision guided the entire room. And Elena? She didn't need to gloat. The mansion stood as proof enough that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in watching someone fall, but in making them rise, even if they have to do it under your own powerfully restored roof. What would you do if you were Elaine? Forgive them or make them pay?